Wonderhussy here, hanging out in the middle of nowhere again. This time I'm out in a vast, mysterious, extraordinarily arid desert valley with a little sand dune field tucked into the north end of it. And what exactly am I doing here? Well, I actually came out here with my sister. You can see her forerunner there, my forerunner there. We camped here last night after hiking out all the way across the valley floor to the sand dune field. That's right, we hiked all the way across this scorched landscape up to the top of the very highest dune, and it was absolutely beautiful. But we weren't just there to appreciate the beauty of the landscape. We were investigating a true crime. Okay, I know this isn't a true crime channel, but I recently read a story. Actually, I read this a couple years ago, and I've been trying to get out here ever since because I wanted to investigate this, about Carlos Castaneda. Okay, Carlos Castaneda, the guy who wrote all those books about the teachings of Don Juan. If you were alive in the 1970s, you probably read at least one of them, or at the very least, you probably heard of Carlos Castaneda. Basically, he wrote a series of books that were sort of metaphysical and dealing with, life and philosophy. And I think a lot of people read those books and took mushrooms and wandered around the desert and had all kinds of spiritual epiphanies. I'm not really sure. I personally have never read any of those books. I tried to read one once, and I just couldn't get into it. But a lot of people did, and particularly, I guess, young white women. Now, most of this information in this video comes from a podcast I just listened to called Trickster, The Many Lives of Carlos Castaneda. But even before that podcast came out, I had read some articles online about how apparently Carlos Castaneda was basically a fraud. I mean, I won't go into all the details here because it'd be a really long video, but apparently he just made everything up in those books, whereas initially he claimed he met this old Yaqui shaman at a bus station in Arizona. Well, it all turned out to be bunk. He made the whole thing up. And long story short, he essentially ended up forming what more or less was a cult. Okay, he had all these young women that followed him and really believed in his teachings. And, well, like I said, I don't want to go into all the details, but these women stayed with him their whole lives, or his whole life, and he basically made them change their names and cut off contact with their families and, classic cult 101 stuff. So if you're a big fan of Carlos Castaneda, don't get mad at me. I'm just presenting what I think by now is pretty well common knowledge. But again, what do I know? What I do know is that back in the year 2003, there were two hikers that hiked just like my sister and I did yesterday afternoon. They hiked across this valley and into those sand dunes. They were planning to spend the night backpacking. Can you imagine how cool that would be? So they had their backpacks on with all their gear in it, and they walked across the desert, and they got to the base of the sand dune field, which I've always wanted to camp in a sand dune field, and I've never done that. It seems like it would be really neat. Matter of fact, yesterday when my sister and I hiked out there, there are a bunch of people camped in that sand dune field right now. We saw at least 5 or 6, 7 campsites back there, and I think it's actually part of one of those spirit quests that I think it's a paid thing. Okay, you pay some company, for lack of a better word, that they bus you out to some remote location in the desert, and then they post you up with a tent, sort of like a half a mile from each other in the same general area for safety, and then they leave you alone for 5 days, 4 nights and 5 days, and you just sit out in nature and, I guess, contemplate mortality or think about your problems, and you're not allowed to eat. You just drink water for 5 days and 4 nights. And then I guess the outfitter comes and picks you up at the end of it, and you have some kind of big powwow or conversation about, so what did you learn about yourself in that 5 days and 4 nights in the desert? But anyway, it was super interesting to see that. And it also kind of tied into what I'm talking about here with Carlos Castaneda, because, well, the desert has long been a place that draws seekers, people looking for answers. I guess it's because the landscape is so vast and empty that there's nothing to distract you, and it kind of lets your mind sort of clear out, and you can really think about the stuff that's really important. Well, that's my theory anyway. Anyway, how all of this ties into Carlos Castaneda is actually really sad. So, as part of his cult mystique, as the leader of this cult, and I'm just going to go ahead and call it a cult, and if you disagree with me, well, I'm sure I'll hear about it in the comments. Anyway, I guess as part of his mythology within this framework, when he died, he was supposedly just going to vaporize into a puff of smoke and, his spirit be elevated to another dimension or whatever. Well, unfortunately, that didn't end up happening. He actually died of some kind of liver failure, and I think he died in around 1998. And when he died, his top 5 acolytes, okay, he had all these women and men that followed him and I guess lived with him and supported him, whatever. Well, he had these 5 women that he called his witches, and they were like the top 5 people in the hierarchy. Well, when he died, they all disappeared, okay? And it's assumed that they all probably committed suicide, but who knows? They might be living in foreign countries under assumed names. Well, that is, except for one of the 5. There's only one of the 5 women who disappeared that we know what happened to. And that's because in 2003, those 2 hikers were backpacking out to the dunes and stumbled on a set of human remains. That's right. Can you imagine you're hiking out to these beautiful sand dunes with your buddy, getting ready to spend the night, drink a few beers, probably smoke a joint, just look at the stars, have a nice time, and then you see a human skeleton in the sand? Well, that's what happened with these 2 guys. They found these bones, so of course they called the park ranger, and the sheriff came out, and they recovered the bones, and they were able to identify that it was this woman named Patricia Parton, whose car had been found abandoned at the end of the road. There's a road that goes out here, kind of like, well, right where I'm pointing, but you still have to walk pretty far to get to the sand dunes. Anyway, her car had been found abandoned out here back in 1998, right after Carlos Castaneda died, but they just never found her remains or knew what happened to her. Well, fast forward 5 years, these 2 backpackers find these bones. They did testing on them. I guess they had DNA testing back then, and they were found to be the bones of this woman, Patricia Parton, who was one of Carlos Castaneda's 5 witches. Only, like I said, because it was basically a cult, he made her change her name to Nuri Alexander, I think was her cult name. Anyway, Nuri, Patricia, whatever you want to call her, by all accounts, she was a beautiful woman, and it's really sad she ended up dying all alone out in this remote corner of the desert. But at least her loved ones know what happened to her. The families of the other 4 missing witches weren't so lucky. So to this day, here we are in 2023, I'm shooting this video on February 2nd, 2023, we don't know what happened to the other 4 women. I mean, it's presumed that when Carlos Castaneda died, because of the mythology he had built up around himself, his top 5 followers probably all committed suicide too. But Patricia Parton is the only one of the 5 that we know for sure what happened to. The other 4 are still considered missing persons. And that brings me to why my sister and I are camped here. At the very end, this is the very end of the road that comes in from the paved road way over yonder. The road kind of dead ends just a ways up, and there's an old abandoned mine somewhere up in those mountains there, where one of the other missing women's families believe her remains might be. That's right, another one of the missing witches, a woman named Amalia Marquez. Well, her family seems to think that her remains are almost certainly in this old abandoned mine up here in these mountains. And the reason they think that is, well, when Patricia Parton's bones were found out there in the dunes, that was their first clue. Like, oh, okay, maybe all 5 women came out here together and made some kind of suicide pact. And then they were doing research, I guess, into this area to see where she might have gone. And they found out there's this, I guess, pretty big abandoned mine up here. And so somebody they were talking to that was familiar with this area was like, yeah, you should really search that mine. So they, I guess, planned to do a search with the Inyo County Sheriff, and they were going to come up here and, look for any kind of remains or any kind of clues. But they were never able to get it together. I'm not sure why. I guess the sheriff flaked on them, and search and rescue wasn't interested, and I guess they didn't feel comfortable doing it themselves. But what really had them fired up that this might be the place her remains were is, as they were researching this mine, apparently there's like one blog where a guy hiked up to this mine, and he posted pictures on his blog, I think from like 2014. And there was like this fire pit with colored glass in it, like 5 different colors of glass. And so to Amalia's family, they saw that and went, oh, 5 different colors of glass, 5 women. I'll bet you anything those, all 5 witches hiked up to this mine, made a suicide pact. Patricia Parton ended up going off that way. They all went different ways. They seem to think that Amalia Marquez's remains are still up in this mine. So my sister and I are going to hike up to this mine and, well, just look around and see what we can see. Although, to be honest, it's 2023. It's been a quarter century now since these women disappeared back in 1998. So I don't think we're really going to find anything. But you never know. Now, I don't know a whole lot about this mine. I think it's called the Big Four mine. And it was founded or started by a woman named Agnes Reed, who, with her husband, they were the ones who started Panamint Springs. They opened the first motel in Panamint Springs. How about that? And she was the cousin of Buffalo Bill. That's right. Buffalo Bill, William Cody, was her cousin. Anyway, they're the ones who originally started mining up here. It's long been abandoned, and the fact that it's abandoned is why Amalia Marquez's family thinks she might be up in there somewhere. Oh, okay. My sister just pointed out we can actually see some of the mine wreckage up ahead. Golly, I don't know. There's supposed to be an adit you can go in, and if it's that little hole way up there, I don't know. Is that an adit? Maybe that's just a shadow. Ugh. I don't really want to climb up to that, but I feel like I have to. Oh, okay, so it looks like there's sort of a campsite or something over there. There's some more wreckage up here. Let me go check this first. Wow, this is definitely one of the most remote and rugged mine sites I've personally ever hiked to. I look down here at the bottom, we see all kinds of old metal detritus. It's like part of an old miner's bed, some kind of bucket. This looks like it was part of a, what do you call that? Like a tramway? Because there's a braided steel cable. And then this thing, whatever it was hanging off of it. That's the adit. Oh, it looks like there's another one up there. I'll bet you anything there's a trail that goes up there. I'll check it out. But I want to go back down and check out that campsite because my sister said that's where that campfire ring with the colored glass is. Okay, here's this little flattened campsite. Well, this would be a cool place to camp up in this spooky abandoned mine canyon. And we have some old timbers over here. We have, oh, look, there's like a cave back there, a little shallow cave. And then here's the fire pit that the guy had a picture of on his blog. And this is, oh my gosh, this is what that poor woman's family, I mean, you know how it is when you're missing a loved one, you'll basically grasp at anything and take anything as a sign. They took this as a sign because there's white, green, brown, kind of like turquoise, and clear. 5 different colors of glass in this fire pit. And I guess they took that as a representation of the 5 witches. Like those women hiked all the way up here, busted up a bunch of bottles, and did like a suicide pact here. I mean, you can see for yourself. There's probably a few busted up green bottles. And then there's some old brown beer bottles. And then there's this really cool, this is like that old milk glass or whatever they call that. Really pretty old glass that's kind of turquoise-ish. And they kind of threw in some old Coke bottles that are also kind of turquoise. And then clear. So white, green, brown, turquoise, clear. 5 colors. But I don't know, man. Like my sister just pointed out, we've seen beer cans and soda cans and other evidence that other people have come up here since it was an operating mine. And well, it could have just been some art made by random people that were camping here. Hard to say. Well, I feel like if I really want to be thorough, I do need to see if I can hike up to that adit. Because this really doesn't prove anything conclusively to me. Yeah, and then too, looking closer at this glass art or whatever you want to call it, it's not even like there's brown in the white pile and then there's turquoise in the green pile. I don't know, man. I find this to be pretty thin evidence. And then like my sister was just saying, like, okay, so say all 5 of these women, you know, they're distraught over the death of their guru. They drive all the way out to the end of that road, then they hike all the way up here, and then I guess they camp out and they make this glass thing, and then they make this suicide pact. And then they all split off 5 different directions. So obviously the one went back down that way to the dunes. Well, where did the other 4 go? I mean, one of them I suppose could have gone up canyon. Well, that leaves 3 more. Okay, maybe one went in the mine. Well, what about the other 2? There's nowhere else to go. Okay, so if I want to try to get up in those adits, well, I'm not going to try hiking up that way because that just looks way too steep and loose. I mean, I suppose I could go farther up canyon and see if there's a way up from behind. Or I could go down here and try hiking up this slope to get up there. Yikes. 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 Oh yeah, look, here's old ties from an old rail. There was a narrow gauge rail going right along the path I'm walking on. Yeah, looks like the adits are right at the top of this chute. Now I just got to figure out how to get up there. And I should note, I haven't passed any no trespassing, stay out, stay alive, abandoned mine signs. So I feel like I'm within my bounds doing this. Or maybe they just don't expect anyone to be stupid enough to try this, so they didn't bother putting up a sign. Sure enough, once I managed to climb to the top of the wooden chute, hanging onto an old braided steel cable for support, I came to a metal chute leading down from a platform with a narrow gauge rail track coming out of a huge mine adit. At one time, I guess rail cars full of ore were sent along these tracks to be dumped down the chute into trucks waiting below, where it was then hauled out of the valley. And there was definitely lots of mining going on up here. I poked my nose into every opening to look for clues, but aside from that first adit, none of the other openings really seemed big enough or deep enough for a woman to go missing in for 25 years. Okay, back over to the main adit. Carefully. Wouldn't want to fall here. Okay, let's go in. Turn on my flashlight. I'm not going to go back super far because, I don't know, I don't want to die. But okay, so we have this. And then there's a short little branch that goes off to the right. I think this might be what connects to that stope that I saw outside, because there is, oh my goodness, yeah, look at all these timbers. Some miner left his old sardine can in here. Look at that, it still has the little key on it to turn it and open the lid. Oh my God, I feel like it even still smells funky. That's just my imagination. That thing is way too old to still smell. Oh, look at this. Oh, I thought it was an old newspaper. I got excited, but it's just an old bocaditos. Nacho cheese flavor. Bocaditos. I never even heard of that. Some kind of chips, I guess they used to make. Anybody ever eat bocaditos? Well, I could go for some right now. All this climbing around works up an appetite. Oh, look, here's the top part of the bag. Yeah, man. Oh my God, that looks old. Bocaditos. Crunchy, round tortilla chips. Holy moly. There's an old box. No clues there. All right, that means that direction's a bust. This is the only way to go. You ain't scared, are ya? I'm not gonna go back super far, like I said, just far enough to, you know, sort of, I don't know, scratch my itch. Ooh, it's nice and warm in here. Now we're going around a corner. We can see, too, the rail line keeps on going, but look! Ah, a dead end. Or wait, is it? Oh, I don't know, man. These timbers don't look super secure. I mean, you can see around on this side, it just goes up to another wall. There's nothing up there, but it is interesting. Look at this chute. It's made out of an old sign. No. No. And then that's, oh no, you know what? It's upside down because look over there. There's a CH. It probably said Chevron. Or gasoline. Oh gosh, I don't know. All I know is my sister's probably worried about me out there, so I'd better get out of this mine. A, B, I'm not wearing a mask, and C, well, there's no time for C. Before I leave though, I'm just gonna say that I looked around pretty thoroughly in here, and I don't see any signs of, you know, a woman having come in here to end her life. You know, certainly no bones or anything like that. You know, and I'm looking in all the little side cubbies as I go. Nothing over there. Nothing over there. It's just some kind of big tank down here. And sweet, blessed daylight ahead of us. Woo-wee! It sure does feel good to get out of that stagnant mine air. I don't want to be too jubilant though, because let's not lose sight of the fact that this woman's family actually thinks she was in there, and so, or maybe they did think, and who knows, maybe they did finally hike up here and look in there for themselves. Oh well, I mean, it was still a very interesting hike, and oh dear, now there's still the little matter of getting back down. Whew. Okay, I feel like I made it past the sketchiest part. I'm back past all the timbers, and well, it almost looks like I'm walking along the ruins of an old road. So it should be pretty straightforward from here. And now I know for sure that there are no human remains in there. So poor Amalia Marquez is either still alive. I mean, these other 4 women, maybe they didn't kill themselves, you know? Like, from what I read, Patricia Parton was like one of his oldest followers. Like, she'd been with him the longest. So maybe she took his death the hardest, and she was the only one out of the 5 who committed suicide. The other 4 might be alive and well, living under assumed names somewhere. And, well, I'm sure that's certainly the hope of the families. All I can say is none of them were in that mine. Holy cow. Okay, we're hiking back down. I finally made it back down into the wash. And we just heard this weird sound. And unfortunately, I didn't have my camera rolling, so you're probably not going to believe me now. But my sister was here too, and she's a very cynical, skeptical, rational-minded person. Anyway, we just heard this sound. It's like, woo! And it kind of sounded like a drone, is what my first thought was. It sounded like a really big drone, but we never saw anything. And it just kind of faded out. And I'm like, oh, well, maybe it was some kind of weird wind current, you know, rushing through this canyon. I mean, it sounded mechanical, though. I don't know. Then, of course, I thought, like, oh, my God, what if it's the ghost of Amalia saying, no, don't leave. I'm up there. Go back and look harder. I don't know where else I could look. I went to the end of every twist and turn in that mine, and I don't think there were any other adits up there. I don't know what more I could do. I mean, I'd call this canyon pretty thoroughly explored by me. Actually, my sister just made an excellent point. If what we heard was indeed the spirit of Amalia Marquez, who came all the way out here to this remote nook of the desert to take her own life, well, then she probably doesn't want to be found. And so the sound was probably her spirit saying, get out of here! Turn off your camera! Leave me in peace! I'll bet you anything. That's what it was. Okay, Amalia, I'm turning off my camera now.